I am Sheri Bradley, 33 years old, and until recently, the senior cybersecurity expert at FinSec, a $6 billion financial technology company. I built their security system from scratch, designed to protect billions in transactions. My boss Damien never understood it, but he certainly enjoyed the profits. Then came that fateful Thursday when I detected the attack. As I scrambled to save everything, Damien slammed his fists on the conference table and fired me on the spot. 17 minutes after security escorted me out, $6.2 billion vanished. If you are watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you are viewing from. Hit that like button, and subscribe to follow my journey from scapegoat to vindication. When FinSec recruited me 3 years ago, it felt like winning the lottery for a cybersecurity specialist like me. Their headhunter reached out after I had presented at Black Hat, the premier cybersecurity conference in Las Vegas. My talk on advanced intrusion detection had caught their attention, and within a week I was sitting across from Rachel Turner, their chief technology officer, in their sleek Manhattan headquarters. "We need someone exceptional to build our security infrastructure from the ground up," Rachel explained, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. FinSec is developing a revolutionary payment platform that will handle billions in daily transactions. We need it to be impenetrable. The offer they presented was generous enough to make me drop my coffee mug when I saw the number. But more than the money, it was the challenge that excited me. Building a security system for a platform that would process financial transactions at that scale was the Mount Everest of cybersecurity challenges. I would be working with cutting-edge technology and some of the brightest minds in the industry. I accepted without hesitation. My first day at FinSec was filled with optimism. The office occupied 3 floors of a skyscraper, with views of Central Park all glass and chrome and humming with energy. The development team welcomed me with genuine enthusiasm, relieved to have someone taking ownership of the security infrastructure they knew was crucial, but had been somewhat neglected in the rush to build features. That was when I first met Damien Harrison, the CEO. Tall, always impeccably dressed in custom suits, he had the confident stride of someone used to commanding rooms. In our first meeting, he shook my hand firmly and said, "We are changing the financial world, Sheri. Your job is to make sure no one can stop us." Damien was brilliant at business strategy and marketing, but his understanding of technology was surface level at best. He knew enough buzzwords to sound knowledgeable in investor meetings, but he relied heavily on his technical team for the substance. Initially, this seemed fine. He trusted the experts he hired and gave us the resources we needed. Rachel became my closest ally at FinSec. In her early 40s, with a PhD in computer science from MIT, she understood both the technical challenges and the business pressures. "Damien is focused on growth and market share," she told me during one of our coffee breaks. "Our job is to make sure that growth stands on a solid foundation." For the first 6 months, everything was perfect. I assembled a team of 5 security engineers, and together we designed what I called Project Guardian. It was an adaptive security system with multiple layers of protection, advanced anomaly detection, and a unique emergency protocol that could isolate and protect core financial data in case of a breach. I was particularly proud of this last feature, which could essentially lock down critical systems and customer funds if it detected sophisticated attack patterns. During those early days, I would often work late into the night, fueled by coffee and the satisfaction of building something important. My apartment in Brooklyn became little more than a place to sleep. FinSec was not just my employer, it was my passion. My dedication to cybersecurity was not random. When I was 19, my parents had their identity stolen, and our family lost nearly all their savings. Watching my father, a high school math teacher, and my mother, a nurse, struggle to rebuild their financial lives had left an indelible mark on me. I had switched my college major from general computer science to cybersecurity the next semester and never looked back. "You have built something special here," Rachel told me, after I presented the completed Guardian system to the executive team. Damien had nodded approvingly, though I noticed he checked his phone several times during the technical portions of my presentation. As we left the boardroom, I overheard him telling Marcus, the head of sales, "Now we can tell clients their money is safer with us than in a bank vault." Little did I know that this attitude, seeing security as a selling point rather than a fundamental requirement, would be the first crack in what would become a chasm. 6 months into my tenure at FinSec, subtle changes began to appear in the company dynamics. Damien, once supportive and hands-off, started showing increasingly erratic moods. Some days he would stride through the office, stopping to chat animatedly with team members. Other days he would barely acknowledge anyone barricaded in his corner office with the blinds drawn. It was during this period that I first identified concerning vulnerabilities in our system. Nothing catastrophic, but the kind of small security gaps that, if left unaddressed, could compound into serious problems. One particular issue involved the way our payment verification system interacted with certain third-party APIs, creating potential exposure points. I compiled a detailed report and requested a meeting with Damien to discuss my findings. When we finally sat down, I noticed dark circles under his eyes as he flipped through my report with obvious impatience. "So what is the bottom line here, Sheri?" he asked, not looking up from his phone. "These vulnerabilities need to be addressed before we integrate with the new banking partners," I explained. "It will require postponing the launch by about 3 weeks, but it is essential for security." Damien finally looked up, his expression hardening. 3 weeks. That is not happening. We have investors expecting this integration next month. We cannot delay. "But the security risks," I started. He cut me off with a wave of his hand. "This is why we have you right, to fix these things without disrupting our business timeline." That same week, FinSec hired Marcus Reynolds as the new product director. Tall and charismatic, with a background at several successful startups, Marcus quickly became Damien's right hand. From our first interaction, it was clear we would clash. His mantra was "move fast, fix later," which went against everything I believed about security. The first truly tense meeting came when I presented my security concerns to the entire executive team. I had prepared a comprehensive breakdown of the vulnerabilities and proposed solutions. "What Sheri is suggesting would push back our release calendar by nearly a month," Marcus interjected before I had even finished. "That means missing our quarterly targets and disappointing our investors." "These are not merely suggestions," I countered, trying to keep my voice level. "These are necessary security measures. Every day we delay is another day our competitors gain ground," Marcus argued, looking to Damien for support. Damien's response was immediate and sharp. "We need growth, not fear." He snapped his fist, landing on the table with enough force to make coffee slosh from cups. "This company was not built by being cautious. We take calculated risks." The problem was they were calculating the wrong risks and ignoring the real ones. After that meeting, I noticed a shift in how my input was received. My team's security reviews began to be seen as obstacles rather than essential safeguards. In planning meetings, I would raise concerns only to have them dismissed as hypothetical threats or worst-case scenarios. Even more concerning, Rachel, once my strongest ally, was increasingly absent from key decision meetings. When I asked her about it, she seemed evasive. "Politics," she said quietly, as we waited for the elevator one evening. "Damien is restructuring some of the decision processes. Just keep doing your job and document everything." That advice to document everything would later prove invaluable. By the 9-month mark, I felt increasingly isolated. Junior developers would avoid eye contact in the hallways after I had flagged security issues in their code. I was no longer invited to certain strategy meetings. Even my direct reports seemed nervous when speaking with me, as if association with the security naysayer might damage their standing. Meanwhile, FinSec was enjoying tremendous financial success. Our payment platform had attracted major clients, transaction volumes were exceeding projections, and Damien was being hailed as a visionary in the financial press. The company valuation had crossed the $3 billion mark, and there were whispers of an IPO in the near future. All this success made my warnings even easier to ignore. After all, how could there be anything fundamentally wrong when the company was performing so well? What they failed to understand was that in cybersecurity, catastrophic failures rarely announce themselves with warning shots. When they come suddenly and devastatingly, exploiting weaknesses that have been quietly growing in the shadows of success. A year into my time at FinSec, the pressure to maintain our meteoric growth led to a systematic erosion of security protocols. What had begun as occasional exceptions to the security review process had become the new standard. Critical updates were pushed to production with minimal testing. Third-party integrations were implemented without proper vetting. Authentication protocols were simplified to reduce user friction. Each of these compromises created new vulnerabilities in our system. I spent late nights scanning our network, documenting every potential exposure point. What I found alarmed me deeply. There were at least 17 critical vulnerabilities that could potentially be exploited by a sophisticated attacker. Some were buried in the code, Others were structural issues with how our systems communicated with external services, and a few were related to inadequate encryption of sensitive data. I compiled all my findings into a comprehensive 40-page report, complete with severity ratings, potential attack scenarios, and detailed remediation steps. The document represented weeks of painstaking analysis, and I believed it made an irrefutable case for immediate action. When I requested an emergency meeting with the executive team, I was initially told that everyone was too busy preparing for an investor presentation. It took a strongly worded email to Damien, copying the entire board to finally get the meeting scheduled for a Friday afternoon. I arrived at the boardroom 15 minutes early to set up my presentation. The room gradually filled with executives, many looking annoyed at having their weekend plans delayed. Damien was the last to arrive, scrolling through his phone as he took his seat at the head of the table. "Let us make this quick, Sheri," he said without looking up. "We have a lot on our plates right now." I distributed printed copies of my report and launched into my presentation. Our security infrastructure has been critically compromised by recent development decisions I began. I have identified 17 vulnerabilities that pose an immediate threat to our platform and customer data. I walked them through the most serious issues, explaining in terms even non-technical executives could understand. As I spoke, I noticed Marcus whispering something to Damien, who smirked in response. When I finished my presentation, there was a moment of silence. Then Damien picked up my report, glanced at the cover, and set it aside without opening it. "Thank you for your thoroughness, Sheri," he said, his tone dismissive. "But I think you are being overly cautious as usual. Our platform is handling billions in transactions without incident. Clearly, our security is functioning adequately." "Functioning so far," I corrected him. "Cybersecurity is not about what has happened. It is about preventing what could happen. These vulnerabilities are real and growing." "With all due respect," Marcus interjected, "we have deadlines to meet and features to deliver. We cannot halt our progress every time there is a theoretical security concern." "These are not theoretical," I insisted, my frustration mounting. "These are documented vulnerabilities that any competent hacker could exploit." Damien leaned forward, his expression hardening. "You know what is not theoretical, Sheri. Our growth targets, our investor commitments, the competitors breathing down our necks. Those are real, immediate concerns." Several other executives nodded in agreement. I looked to Rachel for support, but she was studying her notes, avoiding eye contact. "We appreciate your vigilance," she finally said, her voice careful and measured. "But perhaps we can prioritize these issues and address the most critical ones without disrupting our development schedule." It was a weak compromise, but at least it was something. Marcus, however, was not satisfied with even this concession. "We are already stretched thin meeting our current commitments," he argued. "Diverting resources to chase security ghosts will put us behind. I vote we revisit this after the next release cycle." The meeting devolved from there. My concerns were labeled as excessive, impractical, and ultimately detrimental to company progress. By the end, Damien had agreed only to consider addressing the 3 most critical vulnerabilities, and even that with no firm timeline. As the executives filed out, I sat alone in the boardroom, surrounded by copies of my unread report. Rachel paused at the door. "This is not personal, Sheri," she said quietly. "The company is under enormous pressure to maintain growth." "And what happens when a breach wipes out that growth overnight?" I asked. She had no answer. In the weeks that followed, my position within the company deteriorated further. Colleagues who had once sought my input now avoided me in the hallways. My team was reduced when 2 security engineers were reassigned to higher priority development projects. Access to certain code repositories was restricted ostensibly for streamlining development workflows. I continued to work on Guardian, the robust security system I had built, enhancing its capabilities to detect and respond to threats. The system included an advanced automated response mechanism that could isolate critical financial systems in case of a detected breach, preserving core functionality and protecting customer funds. It was sophisticated technology designed to be the last line of defense. But for it to work properly, it needed to be fully integrated into our systems and regularly updated to respond to new threat patterns. Instead, parts of it were being bypassed or modified to accommodate faster development cycles. The emergency protocols I had designed were now labeled as excessive failsafes and relegated to secondary status. One evening, I found Rachel working late in her office. I closed the door and spoke frankly. "They are gutting our security architecture, Rachel. When not, if we get hit, it will be catastrophic." Rachel looked tired, the blue light of her monitor reflecting off her glasses. I know, she admitted, but Damien and the board are fixated on the IPO. Nothing can delay that, not even legitimate security concerns. So what am I supposed to do? Stand by and watch them dismantle everything I built. Document everything, she repeated her earlier advice. Every warning, every dismissed recommendation, every compromise. Because when something does happen, and God forbid it will, you will need to protect yourself. Her words sent a chill through me. We were no longer talking about protecting the company, but about preparing for its failure and the inevitable blame game that would follow. The day that changed everything began like any other. I arrived at the office early, around 6:30 a.m., as was my habit. The security team had been reduced to just myself and 2 junior analysts, and I wanted time to review the logs before the daily stand-up meeting. That was when I first noticed it. A subtle pattern of access requests from an IP range that should not have been interacting with our authentication servers. Most security monitoring would have missed it, but Guardian, despite being partially sidelined, was still running its advanced pattern recognition algorithms. I dug deeper, tracking the digital fingerprints through our system. What I found made my blood run cold. This was not a random probe or a script kiddie testing our defenses. This was a sophisticated, coordinated attack that had already established multiple entry points into our network. Based on the timestamps, they had been quietly infiltrating for at least 3 days, establishing backdoors and mapping our internal systems. I immediately triggered our incident response protocol, or what remained of it after months of streamlining. The first step was to alert key personnel, starting with the CTO. "Rachel, we have an active intrusion," I said, the moment she answered her phone. "Multiple penetration points, sophisticated actors. I am initiating containment measures, but I need authorization to activate the full Guardian protocols." To her credit, Rachel understood the severity immediately. "Do what you need to do. I will get Damien and the team to the main conference room in 15 minutes. I worked frantically trying to isolate the compromised systems while tracking the intruders' movements through our network. They were good. Very good. Each time I closed off an access point, they seemed to have already established another. They were clearly familiar with our architecture, perhaps through insider knowledge or through weeks of careful reconnaissance. By the time I rushed to the conference room, I had managed to temporarily contain the attack, but I knew it was only a holding action. Without implementing the full Guardian emergency protocols, the attackers would eventually find another way in. The executive team was already assembled when I arrived, most looking confused or annoyed at the early morning emergency meeting. Damien stood at the head of the table, his face a mask of controlled irritation. "This better be good, Sheri," he said, as I connected my laptop to the room's display system. "We have the investor call in 2 hours. We have an active, sophisticated cyber attack in progress," I said, projecting the real-time security logs onto the screen. "They have already breached our outer defenses and are attempting to access the transaction processing systems." I walked them through what I had discovered using the visualization tools I had built into Guardian to show how the attackers were moving through our systems. "How bad is it?" Rachel asked, her face pale. "Potentially catastrophic," I replied honestly. "They are targeting the payment processing infrastructure. If they gain access, they could potentially divert funds, steal customer data, or simply destroy the system entirely." "How did they get in?" Damien demanded. "I thought you said our security was state-of-the-art." The irony of his question after months of ignoring my warnings was almost too much, but I kept my focus on the crisis at hand. "They exploited several of the vulnerabilities I documented in my report 3 months ago," I said, my voice steady despite my rising anger. "The same report that was dismissed as being too alarmist." Marcus scoffed. "So you are using this situation to say I told you so?" "No," I snapped back. "I am trying to save this company from a disaster I repeatedly warned was coming." I turned back to the main display. "The good news is that Guardian has detected the intrusion and has partially contained it. The bad news is that they are still active in our system and are trying to access the core financial infrastructure." "What do we need to do?" Rachel asked. "I need to activate the full Guardian emergency protocol," I explained. "It will temporarily shut down external transactions and isolate our core systems, preventing further infiltration while we expel the attackers." "Shut down transactions," Damien exploded. "Absolutely not. We process over $200 million an hour during peak times. Every minute of downtime costs us a fortune, not to mention the reputational damage. The reputational damage of losing billions of customer funds would be considerably worse, I countered. That is an extreme scenario, Marcus said dismissively. What is the minimum action we can take that will not disrupt business? I could not believe what I was hearing. Even facing an active, sophisticated attack, they were still prioritizing short-term business concerns over security. This is not the time for half measures, I insisted. We need to activate the full emergency protocol now, before they breach the core systems. Damien paced at the end of the table, clearly agitated. How long would this shutdown last? Several hours at minimum, I admitted. We need to isolate the intrusion, remove all backdoors they have established, patch the vulnerabilities, and verify the integrity of our systems before bringing them back online. Hours, Damien looked incredulous. That is unacceptable. Find another way. There is no other way that guarantees the security of our platform, I said firmly. Every minute we delay increases the risk. I think Sheri is overreacting, Marcus interjected. We have had security alerts before that turned out to be false alarms. Remember last quarter when she wanted to take the system offline because of that supposed vulnerability in the API? That was different, I started to explain, but Damien cut me off. I am not authorizing a shutdown based on what might be another false alarm, he declared. Find a way to handle this without disrupting operations. I tried a different approach. At least let me implement partial containment measures. We can isolate the affected subsystems while keeping core transactions running. Rachel nodded supportively. That sounds like a reasonable compromise. Damien appeared to consider this, but as I began pulling up the containment protocols on my laptop, I noticed something alarming on the security dashboard. The attackers' activities had intensified, suggesting they had either detected our awareness of their presence or had reached a new phase in their attack. They are accelerating their efforts, I announced urgently. We do not have time for half measures. I need to activate Guardian now. I began typing the commands to initiate the emergency protocol. Damien strode around the table and looked over my shoulder at the screen filled with scrolling code and security alerts. What the hell is all this? He demanded. How do we even know this is real and not some glitch in your system? This is not a glitch, I insisted. These are coordinated attack patterns from multiple sources. Guardian is detecting and responding to them in real time, but without the full protocol it is fighting with one hand tied behind its back. Damien's face reddened as he watched more alerts pop up on the screen. Then suddenly he slammed both fists on the conference table, causing coffee cups to jump and several executives to flinch. Who built this shit? He shouted, his voice echoing off the glass walls. All this money spent on security, and we are still vulnerable. What have you been doing for the past year, Sheri? The room fell silent. I stood my ground, looking him directly in the eye. I built a system that would have prevented this if you had listened to my warnings, I said evenly. I identified these exact vulnerabilities months ago and was told they were not a priority. Damien's eyes narrowed dangerously. So this is my fault. Is that what you are saying? I am saying we need to act now, or we risk losing everything, I replied, turning back to my laptop to continue the emergency protocols. Stop, Damien commanded. You are done here. I looked up, not comprehending at first. What? You are fired effective immediately, he said, his voice cold and final. Your alarmist attitude and constant disruption of our business objectives ends today. The room was so quiet, I could hear the air conditioning humming. Rachel started to protest, but Damien silenced her with a raised hand. Marcus, he continued, call security to escort Miss Bradley from the building and get the backup security team on this supposed emergency. I could not believe what was happening. You cannot be serious, I said. There is an active attack in progress. You need me to stop it. What we need is someone who can balance security with business reality, Damien replied dismissively. Clear your desk. You will receive your final paycheck and severance details by mail. 2 security guards appeared at the door, summoned by Marcus's text. As they approached me, I made one last desperate attempt. Rachel, you know I am right about this, I pleaded. Do not let them do this. The Guardian protocol needs to be activated now. Rachel looked torn, her eyes moving from me to Damien and back. But before she could respond, one of the guards took my elbow. Please come with us, Miss Bradley, he said quietly. In a daze, I was escorted to my desk where I was allowed to collect only my personal items under close supervision. My company laptop was confiscated, my access cards deactivated, and within 20 minutes of being fired, I was standing on the sidewalk outside the FinSec building, clutching a small box containing 3 years of professional life. As the glass doors closed behind me, I checked my watch. It was 8:23 a.m. I stood there for several minutes, unable to process what had just happened. Then, operating on autopilot, I began walking toward the subway station. I had just reached the entrance when my personal phone rang. The screen showed Rachel's number. "Rachel," I answered, a mix of hope and anger in my voice. But what I heard was not Rachel's calm, measured tones. Instead, her voice was high-pitched and frantic. "Sheri, oh my God, Sheri. It is all gone," she gasped. "They got through. The money is disappearing from accounts. Billions just gone. Damien is screaming. The system is locked up. No one knows what to do. What was that emergency protocol you mentioned? How do we activate it?" I looked at my watch again. 8:40 a.m. Exactly 17 minutes since I had been escorted from the building. "It is too late," I said, a hollow feeling spreading through my chest. Guardian needed to be activated before they reached the core systems. Once they are in the protocol, cannot distinguish between legitimate transactions and fraudulent ones. Rachel's sob was the last thing I heard before the line went dead. By noon, the news of the FinSec hack was breaking across all major financial news outlets. I sat in my Brooklyn apartment, television on, but muted, watching the scrolling headlines while refreshing news sites on my laptop. Major cyberattack hits FinSec. Billions potentially lost. Financial tech giant suffers catastrophic security breach. FinSec stock halted after plummeting 60% on hack news. The details were still emerging, but the scale was becoming clear. Initial reports suggested that over $6.2 billion had been siphoned from accounts in a sophisticated, coordinated attack. The funds had been rapidly moved through a series of international transactions, making recovery unlikely. I felt numb as I watched the financial catastrophe unfold in real time. This was exactly the scenario I had spent years trying to prevent. All those warnings, all those late nights building safeguards, all those contentious meetings where I had been labeled as overly cautious had been leading to this moment. My phone had been buzzing constantly with messages from former colleagues, industry contacts, and even a few journalists who had somehow obtained my number. I ignored most of them, responding only to a text from Rachel. "Are you watching the news? It is a nightmare here." At 3 p.m., Damien appeared on CNBC for an emergency interview. I turned up the volume to hear him, my stomach clenching at the sight of his face. This was a sophisticated, unprecedented attack that no security system could have fully prevented, he stated, his usually confident demeanor replaced by a haggard defensive posture. "Our security teams are working around the clock to contain the damage and recover what funds we can." The interviewer pressed him. "Sources within the company suggest that your head of cybersecurity had warned about vulnerabilities months ago. Is there any truth to those reports?" Damien's jaw tightened visibly. "We have always taken security seriously at FinSec. However, there were differences of opinion about the appropriate balance between security measures and operational needs. Some of the proposed security protocols would have severely impacted our ability to serve customers." "So you were aware of potential vulnerabilities," the interviewer persisted. "There are always theoretical vulnerabilities in any system," Damien deflected. "Our former head of security had a particularly cautious approach that in retrospect might have had merit, but also would have significantly hampered our business operations." I could not believe what I was hearing. Even now he was spinning the narrative, positioning himself as a reasonable business leader who had made an understandable trade-off, rather than someone who had repeatedly ignored explicit warnings about catastrophic risks. My phone rang again. This time it was Rachel calling rather than texting. "It is absolute chaos here," she said, her voice low. I could hear shouting in the background. "The investors are out for blood. The board has called an emergency meeting. The regulators are already on site. And the FBI just arrived." "What about the customers?" I asked. "How many were affected?" "Thousands," Rachel replied grimly. "Mostly large institutional clients, but some individual high-net-worth customers too. The attack was targeted at our highest value accounts." "Have they figured out how the attackers got in?" Rachel laughed bitterly. "Oh, they know exactly how they got in. It was through those same API vulnerabilities you identified in your report. the one Damien set aside without reading. "Is there any chance of recovering the funds?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Minimal." The hackers were incredibly sophisticated. They laundered the money through dozens of exchanges and cryptocurrency platforms within minutes. They clearly knew our systems intimately. I felt a chill at that last comment. "You think it was an inside job?" "The FBI seems to be considering that possibility," Rachel said carefully. "They have been asking a lot of questions about recently departed employees." The implication was clear. "They suspect me?" I asked incredulously. "You were fired literally minutes before the attack was executed," Rachel pointed out. "It looks suspicious on paper." "That is insane," I protested. "I was trying to prevent the attack. Damien fired me for trying to implement the very protocols that would have stopped it." "I know that," Rachel assured me. "And I told the FBI the same thing. I mentioned your warnings the report the emergency meeting this morning, but they will still want to talk to you." As if on cue, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see two individuals in suits holding up badges. "They are here now," I told Rachel. "Good luck," she said. "And Sheri, keep a record of everything you tell them. This is going to get ugly." The FBI interview lasted 4 hours. They were thorough but professional, asking detailed questions about my role at FinSec, the security systems I had built, the vulnerabilities I had identified, and the events leading up to that morning. I provided them with everything. I had copies of my security reports, emails, documenting my warnings, and even recordings of several key meetings where I had explicitly outlined the risks that were subsequently ignored. As Rachel had advised long ago, I had documented everything. "These recordings," one agent said, reviewing the files I had transferred to their secure drive, "did you make them with the knowledge of other participants?" "New York is a one-party consent state," I replied. "And company policy explicitly stated that all business meetings could be recorded for documentation purposes." The agents exchanged glances. "These will be very helpful," the senior agent commented. By the end of the week, the full magnitude of the disaster was becoming clear. FinSec stock, which had been trading at $170 per share before the attack, had plummeted to under $20. The company had lost over 90% of its market value in 5 days. Class action lawsuits were being filed by affected customers and shareholders. Regulators from 3 different agencies had launched investigations. The narrative was beginning to shift as well. Financial technology blogs that had once hailed Damien as a visionary were now publishing detailed exposés of FinSec's security failures. One particularly damaging article in TechCrunch detailed how the company had repeatedly prioritized growth and feature development over security, despite explicit warnings from their security team. Through backdoor channels, I learned that FinSec employees were revolting. An anonymous group had created a document detailing how security concerns had been systematically dismissed by management, with dozens of engineers and product managers adding their testimonies. This document had been leaked to both the press and investigators. 10 days after the attack, I received another visit, this time from a senior investigator with the Securities and Exchange Commission. They were particularly interested in what Damien and other executives had known about security vulnerabilities before the attack and whether they had properly disclosed these risks to investors. By the 2-week mark, the inevitable happened. Damien appeared on television again, this time to announce his resignation as CEO of FinSec. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 2 weeks, his face gaunt, his previously perfect hair disheveled. "While I maintain that this attack was unprecedented and could not have been reasonably anticipated," he said, reading stiffly from a prepared statement, "I recognize that, as CEO, the ultimate responsibility for protecting our customers and shareholders rests with me. I am stepping down to allow new leadership to guide FinSec through this challenging period." It was a carefully worded non-apology, clearly crafted by lawyers to minimize legal liability, but the damage to his reputation was already done. The financial wunderkind who had been on the cover of Forbes just 3 months earlier was now the face of one of the largest cybersecurity failures in corporate history. 2 weeks after the attack, I made a decision I would not be the silent scapegoat in this debacle. While I had been careful in my interactions with investigators, providing facts without commentary, the public narrative was still too muddled. Damien and his allies were working overtime to paint the attack as an unforeseeable force majeure event, rather than the predictable consequence of their own reckless decisions. My first step was to engage legal representation. I hired Patricia Alvarez, a attorney specializing in whistleblower cases and corporate malfeasance. In our first meeting, I laid out everything that had happened, providing her with the same documentation I had given the FBI. "This is incredibly compelling," Patricia said after reviewing my evidence. "The recordings are particularly valuable. They clearly show that you repeatedly warned about specific vulnerabilities and were ignored or even punished for raising concerns." "What is my legal exposure here?" I asked. "FinSec's lawyers have been hinting to the press that former employees might have been involved." Patricia smiled grimly. "They are desperate to shift blame. But based on what you have shown me, you did everything right. You identified risks, documented them properly, escalated them appropriately, and tried to implement emergency measures when an attack occurred. The fact that you were fired for trying to prevent the very disaster that happened minutes later is not just exculpatory, it is damning for them." With Patricia's guidance, I began a careful campaign to set the record straight. We started by reaching out to Jessica Morgan, a respected technology journalist known for her in-depth coverage of cybersecurity issues. Rather than giving her an exclusive interview immediately, we provided her with select documents that contradicted the official FinSec narrative, allowing her to build her own investigation. The resulting article, published in Wired 3 weeks after the attack, was devastating. The warning signs FinSec ignored, how a $6 billion disaster could have been prevented. The piece meticulously chronicled my repeated warnings, the company's systematic dismissal of security concerns, and the fateful decision to fire me as I was attempting to stop the attack in progress. The article included quotes from several former FinSec employees who corroborated my account, including Rachel, who had resigned the previous week. Sheri Bradley was the Cassandra of FinSec, Rachel was quoted saying. She predicted exactly what would happen, was ignored, and then was punished for being right. The Wired piece went viral within hours, picked up by mainstream news outlets, and shared widely across social media. Number FinSec failure and number listen to your security team began trending on Twitter. Former colleagues I had not heard from in years reached out to express support and share their own stories of security concerns being dismissed at other companies. 2 days after the article was published, I received a call from Patricia. "The SEC wants to talk to you again," she said. "This time they want you as a friendly witness against FinSec's executive team." The SEC interview was extensive, focusing on what executives knew about security vulnerabilities and when they knew it. I provided them with meeting minutes, emails, and recordings that clearly showed Damien and others had been explicitly warned about the specific vulnerabilities that were ultimately exploited. "In your professional opinion," the lead investigator asked, "could this attack have been prevented if your security recommendations had been implemented?" Without question, I replied confidently. The attack exploited vulnerabilities that I had identified months earlier and had provided specific remediation steps for. If those steps had been taken, or even if I had been allowed to activate the emergency protocols when I detected the attack in progress, the damage could have been prevented, or at least dramatically reduced. As my evidence became central to multiple investigations, more former colleagues began speaking out. A group of engineers who had worked under me submitted a joint letter to investigators confirming that they had raised similar concerns through proper channels and had been similarly ignored or sidelined. The tide of public and regulatory opinion was turning decisively against FinSec's former leadership. 4 months after the attack, the SEC filed civil charges against Damien and 3 other top executives for securities fraud, alleging that they had knowingly misrepresented the security of the platform to investors. The Department of Justice followed with its own investigation, focusing on potential criminal negligence. Marcus resigned after emails emerged, showing he had explicitly directed developers to bypass security reviews to meet release deadlines. 6 months after the attack, I received an unexpected invitation. The Senate Banking Committee was holding hearings on cybersecurity in the financial sector, and they wanted me to testify as an expert witness. With Patricia's guidance, I agreed. The hearing room was packed with press industry representatives and members of the public. Seated at the witness table, I faced the semicircle of senators, the bright lights of television cameras, making the scenes seem surreal. "Miss Bradley," the committee chair began, "based on your experience at FinSec and your expertise in cybersecurity, what do you believe were the fundamental failures that led to this catastrophic breach?" I took a deep breath before answering. The technical vulnerabilities were real and serious. I testified, but they were symptoms of a deeper problem, a corporate culture that systematically prioritized speed and growth over security and risk management. When security professionals raised concerns, they were marginalized or removed rather than listened to. For nearly 3 hours, I answered questions about specific technical details, corporate decision-making processes, and potential regulatory solutions. My testimony was later cited extensively in the committee's report, recommending significant new cybersecurity requirements for financial institutions. By the 1-year anniversary of the attack, the landscape had changed dramatically. FinSec, once valued at over $7 billion, had been acquired by a competitor for pennies on the dollar. Damien and Marcus were facing both civil and criminal charges. New regulations, inspired partly by the FinSec disaster, were being implemented across the financial industry. As for me, I had become a reluctant but influential voice in cybersecurity policy, speaking at conferences and consulting with companies committed to avoiding FinSec's mistakes. My inbox regularly contained messages from security professionals thanking me for standing up for the importance of their work. The final chapter in the FinSec saga came 18 months after the attack, when Damien Harrison pleaded guilty to reduced charges of securities fraud and negligent endangerment. As part of his plea agreement, he was required to make a public statement acknowledging the facts of the case. Standing on the courthouse steps, looking far older than his 42 years, Damien read from a prepared statement. I acknowledge that I was repeatedly warned about specific security vulnerabilities by Sheri Bradley and other members of FinSec's security team. I further acknowledge that I dismissed these warnings and prioritized growth over security, a decision that ultimately led to catastrophic harm to our customers and shareholders. Ms. Bradley's concerns were valid, her proposed solutions were appropriate, and her termination during the security crisis was unjustified. It was as close to vindication as I could have hoped for. 2 years after the FinSec disaster, I sit in my home office overlooking the Brooklyn skyline, reflecting on the journey that brought me here. The aftermath of those 17 minutes that changed everything was not easy. Despite being vindicated by investigations and court proceedings, I struggled with feelings of failure and betrayal for months. There were dark days when I questioned whether I could have done more, said something differently, found some way to make them understand the risks before it was too late. Imposter syndrome whispered that a truly great security expert would have prevented the disaster despite management opposition. Nightmares about the attack and its aftermath disrupted my sleep for nearly a year. The healing process began slowly. A former colleague invited me to speak at a cybersecurity conference where I shared my experience with an audience of security professionals who understood exactly what I had faced. Their standing ovation broke something open inside me, allowing me to begin forgiving myself for not being able to prevent the inevitable. Therapy helped too. My therapist, Dr. Winters, specialized in working with professionals dealing with workplace trauma. She helped me understand that while I had technical responsibility for security at FinSec, I never had the authority to fully implement that responsibility, creating an impossible situation that was designed to fail. You were set up to be the scapegoat from the moment they started ignoring your warnings, she told me during one breakthrough session. They wanted the appearance of taking security seriously, without the inconvenience of actually doing so. Gradually, I reclaimed my confidence and sense of purpose. 6 months after the FinSec collapse, with the worst of the investigations behind me, I founded Sentinel Cybersecurity Consultants, a firm dedicated to helping companies build not just secure systems but security-conscious cultures. From the beginning, I was determined that Sentinel would be different. We would only work with clients who gave us real authority to implement necessary security measures. Our contracts explicitly stated that we would withdraw and publicly document our reasons if our security recommendations were systematically ignored. To my surprise and relief, this uncompromising approach attracted rather than repelled clients. In the post, FinSec world companies were desperate to avoid similar disasters and willing to commit to serious security measures. Within 18 months, Sentinel had grown to a team of 25 consultants working with clients across the financial, healthcare, and critical infrastructure sectors. Rachel joined Sentinel 6 months after its founding, bringing her technical expertise and executive experience. I should have supported you more forcefully at FinSec, she told me over coffee on her first day. I will not make that mistake again. Together, we developed what we called the Guardian Principles, a framework for integrating security throughout an organization rather than treating it as a separate function that could be sidelined. The framework emphasized clear communication of risks, executive accountability for security decisions, and protections for security professionals who raised concerns. Major corporations began adopting our approach, and I was invited to advise government agencies on cybersecurity policy. The disaster that had nearly destroyed my career had paradoxically made me more influential than I could have imagined. Perhaps the most unexpected development came at a technology conference in San Francisco when I literally bumped into Damien while getting coffee during a break between sessions. He looked startled, then ashamed. The brash, confident executive I had known was gone, replaced by someone who seemed smaller, somehow humbled by failure and public disgrace. He had served 6 months of house arrest and was now working as an advisor to a venture capital firm, specifically evaluating cybersecurity investments. "Sheri," he said quietly, "I did not expect to see you here." "I am giving the keynote tomorrow," I replied, maintaining a professional tone despite the surge of complex emotions. He nodded, looking down at his coffee cup. "I have been following your work with Sentinel, the Guardian principles. They are essentially what you tried to implement at FinSec, aren't they?" "A more developed version," I acknowledged, with the benefit of hindsight. "I want you to know," he said, meeting my eyes for the first time, "that I think about what happened every day, about the warnings you gave that I ignored, about firing you when you were trying to save us." He paused. "I was wrong. Catastrophically, inexcusably wrong." It was not a conversation I had ever expected to have, and I was surprised by the absence of anger I felt. In its place was something like pity, mixed with a recognition that Damien too had been a victim of his own hubris. "The technology world glorifies speed and disruption," I said. "It creates leaders who believe that caution is the enemy of innovation. Until that culture changes, there will be more FinSecs." "That is why your work is so important," he replied. "You are changing that culture." We parted with a professional handshake, not friends or even colleagues, but two people who had learned the same painful lesson from opposite sides of a disaster. That encounter crystallized for me the most important lesson from the FinSec catastrophe. In our digital world, security cannot be an afterthought or a checkbox. It must be woven into the fabric of every system, every decision, every aspect of corporate culture. The companies that understand this will thrive. Those that do not will eventually face their own 17-minute countdown to disaster. Today, Sentinel works with over 50 major corporations and government agencies. We have prevented at least 3 potential breaches that could have rivaled or exceeded the FinSec attack in scale. Each time it was not just our technical tools, but our emphasis on organizational culture and executive accountability that made the difference. I still think about those final moments at FinSec sometimes. The shock of being fired while trying to prevent exactly the disaster that followed. The 17 minutes that transformed not just my life, but an entire industry. But those memories no longer carry the sting they once did. They have become fuel for a mission that extends far beyond one company or one attack. If you have experienced being silenced when raising legitimate concerns in your workplace, know that you are not alone. The path of professional integrity is not always rewarded in the moment, but it is ultimately the only sustainable way forward. Stand your ground, document everything, and remember that the truth has a way of eventually coming to light. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew you were right but were ignored by those in power? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might help someone else facing similar challenges. And if this resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to my channel for more insights from the cybersecurity trenches, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Remember, in the digital age, security is everyone's responsibility, not just the experts. Thank you for listening to my story, and may your systems remain secure, and your warnings always be heeded.